before they're going to be fit enough to crew a vehicle again. So what we tend to be doing from Amiens onwards is we're using tanks at Amiens, well over 400, massive tank attack in that first wave again. We're using then the Whippets and some armoured cars to follow up on the gaps made.
The Whippets being the medium tanks, and this is the heavy tank.
That's the idea behind it. And then this idea that for the following day, pretty much numbers available are down to about half. The next day, half again, and normally by about the fourth day, forget it. You haven't got tanks working at all.
I remember, I was writing that in the regular episodes, and I was stunned actually. People have written down the specific numbers, and you're like, that's amazing. But that first day. Yeah.
And that does it, and that's the key thing. With Amiens, that's the day that the most advances are made, the most gains are. The following days, we do still progress it. The great thing about Amiens, now the British High Command have learned the lesson. Yes, don't flog a dead horse. If that now, the Germans have got their reserves up, don't go any further, draw close to the battle, and this is this key thing that by the later period of 1918, the British have got so good at, their staff work and organisation, they can then move the attack to another area.
Right.
We are moving tanks, but we're now getting so well supplied with artillery that we've got enough artillery to then start that new attack with a quick barrage somewhere else. And that 100 days, it's almost hard picking apart the different battles because it's boxing and coxing all over the place. Amiens does the business on the first bit, on August the 8th, because that's what makes Ludendorff turn around and realise, hang on, I don't think we're going to be able to win this militarily now, because that takes the wind out of his sails. That really does it. The next 100 days just shows how good the British and the French, and now just starting to appear in September, the Americans, how good we're getting.
And even the Belgians in September and October.
Absolutely, that way. And that idea of being able to put a punch in, to take some ground.
Everywhere along the front.
Exactly, and we move the tanks around, but we're getting wise to the fact that actually that initial tank attack, that'll do us, thank you very much. Then we'll reconstitute, let the guys recover, and then go off again. And we're also trying to learn lessons as well, like let's keep more of a reserve, so if we have an opportunity of exploiting the tank further, it's not like we've worn out everyone on the first 5 minutes of the first day with all the tanks.
And using tanks that aren't there to fight, that are there to carry supplies and to resupply.
And we're now getting that technology, so we've got here, we're sitting in a standard Mark V tank. This tank actually went into action on the 8th of August, so at Amiens Day, this tank goes into action. The guy in command, a young Lieutenant
100 years ago tomorrow.
100 years ago, so he's going into action, and he wins a military cross using this tank on that day. This very tank was there in action. So it's recovered afterwards, it's hit later in the month by shell fire, again goes back, gets recovered again, and it's back into action again. So when we see these attrition rates, it seems to be, of those early tanks, don't forget, that's probably because the crew are worn out, something simple's gone wrong.
But they can fix it. And
they'll fix it, and here we go again, chaps, we're ready to go again.
Okay, well, let's go out of the tank and move along and then talk about some of the actual tactics in the field, how these would be used.
Yeah, certainly, and we can look as well, again, back to this idea of how once you've got this good idea, how can we improve on it, how can we do other things with these tanks, and looking at what in the background, don't forget, the high command, the politicians, they really think if we can struggle through 1918 after we've known all those Germans have come back, it's the next year, that's when we're going to do the attacking. That's what the intention was. But after the victory at Amiens, Haig immediately realises, hang on chaps, we can do this before Christmas. Let's keep plugging away. I don't care what the politicians said. Come on, lads, we're going to do it. And there's another onus, which sounds a little odd for us perhaps now, but they were also conscious. Don't forget, the British Army slogged through this, what's left of the Belgian Army, the French Army, massive casualties. If this is our moment, we might be able to win. Let's not suddenly find the Americans turning up, claiming all the glory. So there was another pressure saying, let's make sure we win. If we've got the opportunity now, let's do that and pat the guys on the back. So let's go and have a look at some of those other vehicles that they're starting to prepare for this 1919 attack.
Okay.
Out we go.
Let's go. Okay, so we're outside of the Mark V now, and we're going to take a look at both specialty or unusual, different from a combat tank, right?
Yeah.
Take it away.
So Mark V tank, if you can imagine, the Germans understand how big our standard tanks are.
Right.
So the simpler thing for them to do is make their trenches wider.
Okay.
So what do? If you come and have a look at this fellow here,
Tiny.
this one here is what they call a Mark V 2-star. So it's actually got a stretch bit in the middle, and the whole aim here is, as you've made it longer, it can cross a wider trench. And for Amiens, we've got some of these Mark V star tanks ready, and they use the extra space to bring Lewis gun and machine guns crew forward into action.
Because they have no sponsons or anything.
Well,
they
we have
need,
these
but
female
yeah,
sponsons on
female.
this one, on the side here. But the problem you've got is back to crew conditions. These tanks go forward, the Lewis gun teams jump out.
That same engine, yeah.
And they're pretty woozy. They take a while to get used to the fact that they've been going around the place,
But they're
taking
in
all
combat.
those fumes, and there they are, ready to supposedly fight. So there are problems still, but they also think, if we have a look as well, we come up with, before the end of the war, this is the Mark IX tank, and what you've got here, it doesn't actually see action, but instead of letting the infantry follow the tank,
Yeah.
going into action, why not put them inside? And they actually designed this with the same Ricardo engine as in the Mark V tank. Let's put 30 soldiers in there
Okay.
and carry them forward across the battlefield. Now, they don't actually get to use these because, again, the war ends in November of 1918, but obviously we're planning for this bigger attack in 1919, so we're getting all our ideas and some of the new technology ready for the following year. Now, when the war ends, November the 11th, there's one of these tanks on a lake outside London with flotation pods on the side, and they're looking at the idea we might be able to use tanks for amphibious landings or
Okay.
crossing canals and rivers as well. So all of this technology is being pushed forward. And with the Americans, because I know you're about to ask me about the Americans, with the Americans getting involved, we're also looking at the fact that we've got now, with Britain, France and America, we come together to build a tank that's hiding behind us there that we call the International.
Okay.
And that again is going, there's a factory is starting to be built in France. The Americans are starting to build components for this out in America. We're going to be assembling them. And again, that's going to be part of this massive tank fleet ready for the 1919 campaign.
But what about the American tank tactics in, say, September, October 1918? What were they doing?
So the Americans have turned up. They're using French and British equipment. So they're being supplied by the French and the British. Here we're at Bovington. This is where the 301st, the heavy American tank unit is training. They leave here in August. They go into action later in September in British Mark V star tanks and British Mark V tanks. So again, we always tend to think of Patton and those little Renault tanks. Actually, the Americans are using British heavy equipment as well. They don't see that much action before the end of the war. It's mainly with the French and the British campaigns. They're the ones that are getting the most out of their armour, and certainly with the 100 days, this consistent use of let's attack there, let's attack there. And as I said earlier, in some ways it's almost impossible with those 100 days to actually really define the different battles, because they're kicking off so quickly on this staged way of knocking that German army back.
Now, I wanted to ask a minute ago, but I didn't get a chance. Ventilation in this one.
Yeah.
What's it like? Is it as bad as the Mark V?
It's still pretty bad.
So there are going to be 30 soldiers.
Yeah, they start training with them. Once you get used to the idea and you get used to, it's a bit like some people are good on boats and some aren't.
Oh, okay.
That sense of, actually, I'm now starting to get used to the idea. They actually start making water carriers. Okay, so they put water in there so the guys can have a drink, cool off, do things that way. And again, they're thinking these issues. And again, one thing that we're constantly amazed of when you go around here is that rapid, we've got a problem, this is going to be our solution to it. New problem arises, we're a learning organisation all the time, the British Army in the First World War, and they're trying to find ways. What's the best way of getting the best from this technology? How can we do it better? Ready for that next attack. We've learned this, sir. We can do this way better. I mean, this tank here, so the Mark V, when that goes into action, it's the guys in the field, a guy called Philip Johnson, who's at the main tank workshops. He's the one who actually gets a Mark V tank, cuts it in half, adds 2 panels, and works out that it needs to be longer. back to the factories, chap, and they make them actually in the factories.
Okay. And now, how would they use the heavy and medium tanks together in the field? How would that work? I mean,
we only have a small number of attacks where they're actually going through together. So we're using our Mark 5. Amion's a prime example of this idea of the heavy tanks doing the breakthrough, lighter tanks going forward.
exploiting it.
But already with gun carriers, with supply tanks, with all these other versions of the vehicles, they're trying to put them together so that we've got an effective way of keeping a momentum going.
Okay.
Or after that first day, as we were discussing, if only half the tanks are ready, we'll carry on the attack the third day, second day maybe. After that, draw a close, let everyone recuperate, we're ready to attack
Down the
again
line 3 days
in a different
later.
area. So when we've got our breath back, as it were, and do another punch somewhere else. Staff work, organisation, logistics, they're getting brilliant at this now.
Yeah, and
by the second
the
half of
Germans couldn't keep up,
1918.
and we see that more and more in August and September. They just can't even guess where the next one's going to hit.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, once they start surrendering, they're actually surrendering. A lot of them, they were surrendering without fighting in many cases in August and September.
And I think you've got as well, so you can't lay claim that the tank's winning it. It's artillery still that's doing the most casualties.
Sure.
But what you've got in so many of the German memoirs is when the tanks appear, these guys, they've gone through a lot, they've fought as best they can, they've done all they think they can, whatever Ludendorff's telling them. I'm sorry, chum, when a tank comes, I think I've done my best.
On top of
Exactly that.
Right.
So that's your excuse to, you've done your best, actually there's a tank coming our way, that's the moment
That's
the
it.
hands go up, or we're deciding not for
Yeah.
me today, chum.
Well, thank you very much once again, David
Thank you.
Willey. If you'd like to support the Tank Museum Bovington, there's a link to their Patreon in the description. And if you'd like to see their YouTube channel, which is, well, all kinds of tanks, as you can imagine the Tank Museum does, you can click right here for that. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Alright, I feel like documentaries right now, so I'm gonna play and I'm gonna listen over here. So currently 5:22 a.m. on the East Coast, United States over here, and I'm Josh Wykowski, and I like to play on the internet. That's right. Yeah, well, I'm a roofer, right? Yeah, well, here it is. Alright. Gotta find another video over here. Alright, so I hope everybody's doing well this morning, and I'll leave it at that. Alright, I'll continue.
I'm Indy Nidell, and this is the Great War on the Road. Now today, I'm at the Tank Museum Bovington in England, and we're going to talk about tanks, the adolescent years. And by that, I mean the moments when the full potential of the tank on the battlefield really began to be unleashed. Now with me is the curator of the museum, David Willey. David, it's great to have you here.
Hello
with us.
again.
Thank you.
Hi there.
And he knows all about this, so I'm just going to let him go. Now, before we can talk about the adolescent years of the tank, can you say a few words about, let's call them the prepubescent years of the tank, in terms of tactics and the thoughts about how they were used?
Okay, so we all know tanks are first used at the end of the Somme battle. Okay, so that's back at the end of September of 16.
Yeah.
They're not a great success, but Haig, the commander-in-chief, sees their potential. He carries on ordering them. He sees they can do something on the battlefield. The following year, they're used at Arras, not amazingly successfully, but they do have moments. And then they're used at Passchendaele. And the problem for the tank corps guys, the guys who are actually serving in these vehicles, what they're really looking at is they are arguing all the time, how is the best way that we can use tanks? Now, everybody is learning on the job, so don't forget, we can always try and blame the high command, they don't know what they're up to, etc. They're all learning, it's a brand new weapon. But the tank corps guys are arguing, don't put our tanks forward on boggy ground like at Passchendaele.
Sure.
Don't let them attack in small numbers. There's one small, very effective attack at Passchendaele, an action called the Cockcroft action. But on the whole, the tanks seem to be wasted. They get stuck in the mud. they're done in penny packets, it doesn't seem to have a great effect. Now Haig, the Commander-in-Chief, is desperate before the end of 1917 to see some sort of victory on the Western Front.
Right.
And basically 2 plans come together. People come together and say, let's use new artillery tactics, let's use these tanks in the way that the Tank Corps wants. So the guy in charge of the Tank Corps, Ellis, he goes up to the 3rd Army commander, Julian Byng. Byng takes the ideas together and says, let's do an attack on a bit of ground that hasn't been chewed up by artillery for months or weeks. Let's do it as a surprise attack, as a raid. Haig, being Haig, wants to slightly get over-optimistic about this, extends the idea of the raid into maybe we can do a bit more of a breakthrough. So they give the Tank Corps, for the first time, what is it that you really want to do in terms of an attack? So here at Cambrai, what you actually see is the idea, really for the first time, that you're getting tanks together en masse, so you're getting over 400 going into the attack. You're getting new tactics that the Tank Corps work out. We can have a look at some of those ones. And you're also getting, surrounding this, is new artillery tactics and the use of air power and new infantry infiltration tactics. Those things coming together, for the first time, they're experimenting with it, but it leads to this sense of Cambrai, certainly at the beginning, being a real success for the British and a learning curve that quickly, sadly for the British, goes. 10 days later was when the Germans counterattack.
And it was a hell of a counterattack too.
Fantastic bit of German, typical German, they can do it.
Well, shall we
yeah, we can have a look at some of the things they're doing there to do with this, the build-up to Cambrai. Now, one of the things is, we mentioned yesterday, or we mentioned before, that the use of railways with your tanks, with a Mark IV tank, one of the key things to remember is you don't want to drive it too long on the road or on the ground, because quite simply you're wearing it out too quickly. So what they do is they use railway flats to bring the tanks right up near the battlefront, and they lay lines specially to bring the tanks forward. They also use aeroplanes to fly over, so that you've ended up hiding the sound of any tanks coming forward. So the planes go over the top all the time when they're doing the marshalling, driving forward to the start line. And here as well, you can see in the front there's a female Mark IV with a fascine on. So by being able to push those sponsons into the tank, it narrows its width. And so on those flats, the railway flats, it means it can go through tunnels, and also trains can pass the other way without any risk.
Okay.
And they're laying railway lines right up to start points behind the front line, so they don't have far to drive. So again, mechanically, these vehicles have got much more chance of getting into action rather than getting stuck or breaking down on the way forward.
Okay, because that's always been a big problem up to Cambrai.
Exactly. These are not reliable vehicles, even still. The other thing they're trying to do is work out better tactics with the tanks. So the idea being is they're training with the infantry that they're going to attack with. Yeah. They're using those tanks to go ahead of the infantry to crush down the barbed wire, and they also use ideas like this anchor. These are actually being towed behind tanks on a big metal hawser, and the idea is you go through this thick barbed wire, 2 tanks will go through it, turn left and turn right and rip that wire apart to drag it out of the way. And what tends to happen is the actual hook will start spinning around as it's being dragged along, and you see these massive bundles of barbed wire being ripped out of the way. That was done where they wanted the cavalry to come through. Okay. The infantry on the whole, when a tank's crushed down the wire, can step over it. Whereas the cavalry, a horse, will still find that very alarming. So using hooks like this, they can rip them apart and try and make a bigger space in the front line. They're also doing things as well with the infantry where they're working out what's the best way for the infantry to follow the tank on the advance. So the tank goes ahead, crushes the wire, allows the infantry to follow on, and the infantry in different divisions, they're working out, is it better to go in a snake formation? In other words, one infantryman follows behind another, and they just follow almost the tracks. Right. About 50 yards back, 20 yards back, they work out what's the best way of doing this. Unfortunately, in the centre section, under a guy called General Harper on the 51st Highland Division, his section there, Harper starts arguing the case that he's worried about the tanks drawing so much fire, he wants his infantry to keep further back and out the way. And unfortunately, in that section, when the attack goes in, there is. It just so happens they're also attacking a very experienced German unit with anti-tank guns as well, and this combination means a failure on that bit of the sector.
Well, the Germans had started developing anti-tank tactics by this point.
They are, and the key one for the Germans' point of view, psychologically, we're talking about attacking now the Hindenburg Line.
Yeah.
So actually, that Hindenburg Line is massively thick in barbed wire. We see a barbed wire fence today and think, oh, well, that's barbed wire. Actually, on the Hindenburg Line, you're talking about 100-meter belts of thick barbed wire. And there's a description of it. The guy says you couldn't get a broom handle and push it straight through that wire. It was that thick. So getting through that. So the German thinks wire's helping them, certainly on the Hindenburg Line. They're then looking at the point about staging their defences. So you've got almost like a fallback positions being able to go through.
Yeah.
They're making their trenches wider, which is why we carry those fascines.
Right.
So again, a wider trench means a tank might get stuck in it. And they've trained up. In 1917, they've been training up artillery units to hide behind the front line and wheel those guns out only when they're necessary.
One of the guns over there that
We've got, this is an example actually of a 77mm field cannon. This particular one was captured at Cambrai by a chap called Albert Baker. We've got a dummy of him there. And what the Germans are doing, they're quite sensibly keeping their anti-tank guns hidden from the frontline positions. What they tend to do is have them on reverse slopes or wheel them out when they're necessary, put them forward into positions which then have a good field of fire. So Flesquieres Ridge at the Cambrai battle, classic example, where some well-trained German gunners wheel out their guns, they wait for the tanks to come cresting at the horizon, then they do their damage.
Right.
And of course, at this sort of caliber of gun, the relatively thin armour on a tank, you don't actually even have to hit the tank. A shell, a high explosive shell nearby will do a hell of a lot of damage to a First World War Mark IV tank.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the actual first day of the Battle of Cambrai. How many tanks did they bring over? What were they using?
So they've got the Mark IV tank. They're using, for the first time, they've got also a number of supply tanks.
Yeah.
So what they do is they take older tanks, some of the Mark IIs and some of the Mark I tanks. They actually, instead of having the guns on the side, they plate over where the guns were and fill the interior up with supplies. So you've got fuel being able to go relatively forward.
Supplying tank.
Exactly that sort of thing. And they also take ammunition that they can help supply the infantry as well.
Nice.
So again, that's another one of these new tactics they're using. And what they're trying to do is they're using that tank on mass attack.
Yeah.
So you've got over 400 tanks sweeping down what tends to be fingers of land that are going towards Cambrai.
Unbroken land.
Unbroken, massive amounts of barbed wire. They start at 6 in the morning with over 1,000 artillery pieces. But the thing about, again, that new bit about the battle is the artillery has not pre-registered with fire. So the Germans don't know it's coming. They've used sound, they've used all these new techniques they're doing, so they don't end up having to fire one round over, one round under, and we think we're about on target.
Yeah.
They actually start, they get the last gun in position about 20 minutes before 6 o'clock and where the barrage begins. It's dark, don't forget, this is November. The tanks move off on a mass attack. They go ahead of the infantry following on behind. And basically, if you can think of the battlefield as great big deep German trenches and barbed wire positions, a couple of canals up the side, and so it's a sort of channeled battlefield. And the initial attacks are massively successful, to the point that they're actually surprising themselves, and the British have certain problems, which is we didn't realise we were going to be quite this successful. The tanks get past the first line of the German defences. What's the first thing all the soldiers want to do is go and have a look around, let's grab a souvenir. Actually, look, the Germans were cooking breakfast, let's finish it for them. So they actually found keeping that momentum going was quite hard work, because, and the Germans found it again the following spring in 1918, that terrible tendency to think, good grief, we've survived this initial attack, let's stop and have a cup of tea or do something else. They continue forward onto the second line. In most places they're successful. In front of Flesquieres Ridge, the Germans have heavily defended an area here with anti-tank guns. That's where the British are held up. They also hope to cross one of the canals to let the cavalry head off into the distance. The Germans again blow up the canal bridges.
Okay.
And this is too early for us to have portable bridging, so we have a lot of trouble trying to get tanks forward. So day one is a massive success comparatively for the British. Day two, it starts breaking down again. And they've only got about 200 tanks left that are working.
I was going to say, because the tanks start breaking down again.
They do, and this also, another thing that they pick up on from the end of this battle, they haven't got a reserve. They haven't kept a huge number of tanks back,
so you can
ready to actually then exploit that. The arm of exploitation they're hoping to use at Cambrai is the cavalry still. Right. So the cavalry is sitting there.
Well, Haig
Haig's a cavalryman, he loves his cavalry, he's got them still sitting there. They only really get the message at about 3 in the afternoon that, come on chaps, we've done this breakthrough, why aren't you guys going? Why aren't we getting there? And I have to say the cavalry comes across not particularly well on the day, because by 3 o'clock they're looking like, hang on a second, we've only got an hour of daylight left, let's go back and water the horses and bed down for the night. So the cavalry does not find its moment, but that's what those tanks were breaking through for. Let the cavalry go through the gap and do all the damage into the distance.
And they took more ground then than they had for the 3 months of Passchendaele, right?
You've got a 3-mile advance, about 3 miles wide, 4,500 prisoners taking. The church bells are rung back in Britain because at last we seem to have a serious victory. That's how impressive it was. And it is, in the sense, like psychologically, wham, the Tank Corps have proved their point. If you use tank on firm ground, good tactics, you can do this type of thing. What it is, though, is this phrase that's often used, that learning curve for the British Army. What they realise, though, is there's so many more things they could get better at in using these tactics.
Hence adolescence.
Exactly that. This is one of those battles it's concentrated on. You can imagine why the Tank Corps, they still celebrate this battle today. 20th of November, that's when all the guys who serve in what's now the Royal Tank Regiment, that's where they go out, have a drink. They read Ellis's special order that he gave to the men first thing in the morning. Very inspirational order that he gives. He actually gets in a tank to go off in the attack with the guys. You know, he's proving that this is our moment, lads. This is where we can do it. It's 1918, if we're honest, when the tank really grows up.
So the events of that day, what did that mean symbolically, say, for the British?
Well, the tank has already captured the public imagination, and now this is this amazing victory that certainly in Britain we put down to the tank. We tend to forget about the artillery, air power, the infantry contribution. They look back at home front. They talk about the tank all the time. So, and this has led to a kind of British home front love affair with the tank, because not only has it given us a victory, but it's also the tank. At last, we seem to have something over on the Germans. The Germans have used air power against us first. They're the first to use poison gas. At last, we seem to have technology one up on the Germans. And that, the British public fall in love with the tank. So there's actually more souvenirs made in Britain that are tank-shaped than any other type of wartime souvenir.
Day.
Pretty much. A number of supply tanks. So what they do is they take older tanks, some of the Mark IIs and some of the Mark I tanks. They actually, instead of having the guns on the side, they plate over where the guns were and fill the interior up with supplies. So you've got fuel being able to go relatively forward.
Supplying tank.
Exactly that sort of thing. And they also take ammunition that they can help supply the infantry as well. So again, that's another one of these new tactics they're using. And what they're trying to do is they're using that tank on mass attack. So you've got over 400 tanks sweeping down what tends to be fingers of land that are going towards Cambrai.
Unbroken land.
Unbroken, massive amounts of barbed wire. They start at 6 in the morning with over 1,000 artillery pieces. But the thing about, again, that new bit about the battle is the artillery has not pre-registered with fire. So the Germans don't know it's coming. They've used sound, they've used all these new techniques they're doing, so they don't end up having to fire one round over, one round under, and we think we're about on target. They actually start. They get the last gun in position about 20 minutes before 6 o'clock and where the barrage begins.
Okay.
It's dark, don't forget, this is November. The tanks move off on a mass attack. They go ahead of the infantry following on behind, and basically, if you can think of the battlefield as great big deep German trenches and barbed wire positions, a couple of canals up the side, and so it's a sort of channeled battlefield.
Okay.
And the initial attacks are massively successful, to the point that they're actually surprising themselves, and the British have certain problems, which is we didn't realise we were going to be quite this successful. The tanks get past the first line of the German defences.
Yeah.
What's the first thing all the soldiers want to do is go and have a look around, let's grab a souvenir.
Yeah.
Actually, look, the Germans were cooking breakfast, let's finish it for them.
Yeah.
So they actually found keeping that momentum going was quite hard work, because, and the Germans found it again the following spring in 1918, that terrible tendency to think, good grief, we've survived this initial attack, let's stop and have a cup of tea or do something else.
Yeah.
They continue forward onto the second line.
Yeah.
In most places they're successful. In front of Flesquières Ridge, the Germans have heavily defended an area here with anti-tank guns.
Yeah.
That's where the British are held up. They also hope to cross one of the canals to let the cavalry head off into the distance. The Germans again blow up the canal bridges.
Okay.
And this is too early for us to have portable bridging, so we have a lot of trouble trying to get tanks forward. So day one is a massive success comparatively for the British. Day two, it starts breaking down again, and they've only got about 200 tanks left that are working.
I was going to say, because the tanks start breaking down again.
They do, and this also, another thing that they pick up on from the end of this battle, they haven't got a reserve. They haven't kept a huge number of tanks back,
so you can
ready to actually then exploit that. The arm of exploitation they're hoping to use at Cambrai is the cavalry still. Right. So the cavalry is sitting there.
Well,
Haig's a cavalryman, he loves his cavalry, he's got them still sitting there. They only really get the message at about 3 in the afternoon that, come on chaps, we've done this breakthrough, why aren't you guys going? Why aren't we getting there? And I have to say the cavalry comes across not particularly well on the day, because by 3 o'clock they're looking like, hang on a second, we've only got an hour of daylight left, let's go back and water the horses and bed down for the night. So the cavalry does not find its moment, but that's what those tanks were breaking through for. Let the cavalry go through the gap and do all the damage into the distance.
And they took more ground then than they had for the 3 months of Passchendaele, right?
You've got a 3-mile advance, about 3 miles wide, 4,500 prisoners taking. The church bells are rung back in Britain, because at last we seem to have a serious victory. That's how impressive it was. And it is, in the sense, like psychologically, wham, the Tank Corps have proved their point. If you use tank on firm ground, good tactics, you can do this type of thing. What it is, though, is this phrase that's often used, that learning curve for the British Army. What they realise, though, is there's so many more things they could get better at in using these tactics.
Hence adolescence.
Exactly that. This is one of those battles it's concentrated on. You can imagine why the Tank Corps, they still celebrate this battle today.
Yeah.
20th of November, that's when all the guys who serve in what's now the Royal Tank Regiment, that's where they go out, have a drink. They read Ellis's special order that he gave to the men first thing in the morning. Very inspirational order that he gives. He actually gets in a tank to go off in the attack with the guys. You know, he's proving that this is our moment, lads. This is where we can do it. It's 1918, if we're honest, when the tank really grows up.
So the events of that day, what did that mean symbolically, say, for the British?
Well, the tank has already captured the public imagination, and now this is this amazing victory that certainly in Britain we put down to the tank. We tend to forget about the artillery, air power, the infantry contribution. They look back at home front. They talk about the tank all the time. So, and this has led to a kind of British home front love affair with the tank, because not only has it given us a victory, but it's also the tank. At last, we seem to have something over on the Germans. The Germans have used air power against us first. They're the first to use poison gas. At last, we seem to have technology one up on the Germans.
Right.
And that, the British public fall in love with the tank. So there's actually more souvenirs made in Britain that are tank-shaped than any other type of wartime souvenir. pretty much in the First World War. So that idea of what you might call the popular arts, the China tanks, the badges, you know, there was a handbag made in the shape of a tank. They actually had a dance.
I want one of those. That would be great.
There's a dance in London called the Tanko. Everything becomes tank obsessed. And the government pick up on this because they then start using tanks. Later in November, for the first time, a tank goes around something called the Lord Mayor's Parade. So it's paraded off in London. It then sits on Trafalgar Square, and then they start a program called Tank Banks, where they take tanks that have served on the battlefront around Britain, around the country, to actually help raise money for the war effort. So you queued up behind the tank, they kept the sponsor door open, and you bought your war bonds there, had them stamped, wore your badge, did all this competition between different towns, who could raise the most money on Tank Week. So, you know, they psychologically, they have a huge impact on the home front for the best.
Seeing a tank, if you're a kid seeing a tank in 1917, I mean...
Well, it's brand new technology. You know, this is the stealth bomber of its day. So again, that idea, you're seeing something, you just haven't seen anything like this before. So don't forget though, 1917, despite all this fuss that's made of Cambrai, really, your word adolescence, it's a following year that the tank comes to maturity at the Battle of Amiens. That's when they really show off. But this is one of those staging post battles that really shows the tank's potential.
But as we've seen, they learned a lot from what worked and what didn't work. So that's
and that's that learning curve again. We're really getting better at what we're doing.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this, you guys. I hope that was fascinating. I know it was fascinating because David's fascinating. If you'd like to check out their YouTube channel, Tank Chats is the format?
We do one called Tank Chats, and we've got interviews, all sorts of things on there.
Okay, well, you guys can check it out right here. Do not forget to subscribe, and we will see you next time. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is another exciting episode of The Great War on the Road. Now, today, we're in England at the Tank Museum, Bovington, and this fine gentleman and I are going to talk about tanks. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is another exciting episode of The Great War on the Road. Now, today, we're in England at the Tank Museum, Bovington, and this fine gentleman and I are going to talk about tanks. Now, can you tell everybody out there in TV and YouTube land who you are and what you do and a little bit about the museum?
So, my name's David Willey. I'm the curator here at the Tank Museum. The Tank Museum is based in the southwest of England, way away from anywhere else, because this is where they came in the First World War to train with this new secret weapon called the tank. And the army came back after the First World War. The tanks were brought back from France, littered the fields around here, chopped up way into the 1930s, but they got some of those tanks, put a wooden fence around it, and used it as a teaching collection. And that's the beginning of this museum, and we've now got over 300 vehicles here, probably the best collection of tanks in the world, as well as an outstanding collection of First World War vehicles.
Now, if you can imagine that 300 tanks takes up a lot of space, you're absolutely right. When we were coming here, I didn't think it was going to be quite this massive, but yeah, 300 tanks takes up a heck of a lot of space. Now, I'd like to talk about what we're standing in front of right now. Now, this is a Mark IV, right?
This is a genuine Mark IV First World War tank. This is the type in Britain we made the most of in the First World War. Over 1,000 of these tanks were made, and we think this particular tank stayed here at Bovington, was probably used as a training tank. The only issue we've got is with a number of our tanks in the collection, as time goes on, we've actually been finding more things out about them. Because over time, when you've had things that we'll call gate guards, so sometimes you had a tank that sat outside a base somewhere, bits of it were nicked to help restore another tank, or things changed around. So some of the time we're actually finding more information out as time goes along.
Now, this is the male version of the tank. There's a male and a female version, as we talked about in the tank special and stuff. Can you tell us about the armaments that both the male and the female would have?
Yeah, on here, if you want to have a closer look, this is what's called the 6-pounder gun. Nowadays, we'd probably call it a 57mm, size of the hole across the end of the barrel. At this stage, in the British military, they're still talking about the weight of shot that the gun fires. They start off in the Mark I tank by using ex-naval 6-pounders. They're much longer.
Okay.
And the problem they had there was that when the tank's going across rough ground, these longer barrels could dig into the ground, catch on a tree stump. So they shorten them and then start actually producing, specifically for the tanks, what they call a Hotchkiss 6-pounder. And again, in this slot here, you'd actually have the telescope behind here, built onto a sponson, the bit that's on the side, so this carries on from the naval effect coming off for the naval battleships. And the idea with the Mark IV, they've got it now, that you can push the sponsons inside the tank for transport on rail. The Mark I, they unbolted them and literally had to take them all off when they were going to travel.
And now this will have 2 of these, and it had the male, was it 4 machine guns or 5 machine guns?
Depends on what role they're going to be playing. Now again, on this one, with the Mark IV, they go through a period where they're using Lewis guns and Hotchkiss machine guns. And if you look on our ball mounts here, these are actually, the mounts on here are for Hotchkiss machine guns, not the round-ended Lewis guns. And they had pros and cons for using the different types of weapons. The Lewis gun, they found when they were firing it from inside a tank, tended to suck the air back inside and start poisoning the atmosphere. The British Army, because we'd had the Hotchkiss machine gun in service with the cavalry right from before the First World War, they actually quite like the Hotchkiss, even though it only fires a strip of bullets.
Yeah, I knew it was different. I've been reading that it was different in ammunition, but I didn't know which way it was. Now, how heavy are these things? I mean, you can see, he can see, and everybody can see that these are massive, massive machines. But just how massive are we actually talking?
You're looking at a 30-ton vehicle here, so it's a pretty big weight. And even with this, the tank we've got here, a Mark IV tank, you're still looking at a construction process that is, even though they build 1,000, everything is almost custom built. So taking a plate off one tank and trying to put it on another, you'll find they're having to re-drill holes and do bits and pieces that way. And you're also still looking at a generation of vehicles with a Mark IV that they've got major mechanical problems all the time. So the idea of 30 tons, the last thing you want to be doing is driving this until you really have to. Hence back to moving it on trains, getting it nearer the front line that way. You offload, you do the driving at night, so hopefully the enemy don't actually know where you are or don't hear you. Sometimes when they're getting it up to the front line, they're actually flying planes over the top to try and mask that noise from the enemy. What the problem with those early tanks, so many of them are breaking down before they even get to the front line.
We saw that before they got to the starting line. Can you tell us about the difference between the male and the female?
So yeah, with the male tank, so you've got those 6-pounder guns. They have a female which has a slightly smaller sponson, and that has 2 machine guns in. The Mark I's have Vickers machine guns. Later on, again, they're trying other combinations to put, whether it's Lewis guns or Hotchkiss machine guns. The general gist behind it is they think the female on the First World War battlefield is more useful than a male. They make them about 50-50. Female tanks, when you think of a First World War battlefield, if the tank's advancing over all that rough ground, spraying away towards the enemy positions is probably just as effective as trying to stop and aim one of these 6-pounder guns. Because quite often, if you see those, again, frontline photographs, there's very little for a 6-pounder gun to fire at. Now, they fire armor piercing, so a solid shot. You could fire that at a pillbox, or if you think there's something really worth taking on. But on the whole, they're either firing, if it's infantry, they fire case shot. So lots of equivalent of like little pellets and ball bearings. So it's firing almost like a shotgun, and that can shred away a position as well as, sadly, people. So again, high explosive they're going to be using. The problem with a 6-pounder though is, again, finding a worthwhile target on a First World War battlefield. So female tanks on the whole tend to be more useful.
Now, what was the crew situation like? How many people would run one of these? So was it a standard crew, or was it a variable thing?
No. You have 8 men. You're trained together. 8 men actually crew a Mark IV tank. You need 4 guys to drive it, and 4 guys man the guns. So 2 on either side. Whether you're a female tank or a male tank, 2 of you on the sponsons. 4 of you needed to drive it, because we can have a look inside and actually see what it looked like.
Okay.
But the general gist is, when you're driving along, this is not a one-man job.
No.
2 at the front, 2 at the rear. You're all needed if you're going to turn or manoeuvre this tank.
So can we go inside?
You can indeed. So we put some steps there. So watch it as you climb in. Everyone says, yes, yeah, I'll be careful, and then they go and bash their head. So watch it climbing through.
Try. Wow.
And as you can see, it's a pretty cramped space in here.
Yeah.
I'll squeeze past you. I'll go up the front to the commander's position.
Commander's position. Well, so tell us a little bit about just the interior in general. I mean, you told us about the crew. You can kind of see who sits where, sort of. But
well, there's the seats is a sort of. There's only really 2 proper seats.
Yeah.
I'm facing the wrong way. I'm sitting where the commander would sit. We'd be looking out that way. Driver would sit over there, again looking out the front.
Yeah.
These are almost considered the best positions because of you've got the chance of a bit of air coming in as you're driving along. Obviously, these vision ports are closed down as soon as we start heading into action, and you look through, and the top here, a little silvered mirror would actually go in there, and so it works like a little periscope. So you look through, and it actually looks out the top. Some of the tanks as well, they put glass prisms in, again silvered top and bottom, so you've got like a periscope.
Yeah.
Problem, of course, is as soon as bullets hit that glass, it could shatter it. It doesn't come inside, but it may shatter the glass.
And then you're effectively blind that way.
So another one of those vision points there. This is where a ball mount for putting a Lewis gun facing forward, if we need to face forward. And one of the other things, that as you look around in a number of places, there's small little pistol ports. So you actually can put your pistol out of that port. There's one on the floor there, so if we're driving over a trench, if we think there's a German hiding underneath here somewhere, we've got opportunities to try and get at all the different angles. So some of those ports as well, you'll see them on the floor, on the sponsons on the side, and actually on the roof, because again, they've learned that experience from the Mark 1s. If German soldiers are jumping on the top of the tank, crowbar, stick grenade, trying to prise their way in, you need to be able to shoot them off the roof.
Right. You want to tell us a bit about the engine and how the engine's working?
Yeah, you're actually sitting on the engine here. This is something called a Daimler sleeve valve silent night engine, and really it's a pre-war tractor engine. The Daimler engines are being made under license in the UK. This one is a type of engines they use in the Mark 1 tank. It's really based on a framework with the gearbox and differential at the back. And what they do is they use the same engine. They were hoping to get a new engine designed by a chap called Harry Ricardo. They were hoping to get it in the Mark 4 tank. It wasn't really ready in time. So they carry on using this petrol engine, starting handle at the rear. 4 of you needed to turn that starting handle.
Wow.
And you actually need 4 crewmen to drive it. So not only do the driver with his clutch and his brake pedal, but the commander's got a role in driving it as well. So if we're going to turn left or right, first thing we have to do is we bash on the metalwork to get the other gearsman's attention. Noise of the engine when it's running is so loud that we won't be able to talk. We don't have speaking tubes, don't have internal comms that way. So as soon as we bashed on that metalwork, get their attention, hand signal 1 or 2, left or right, that indicates which direction we're going to go in. And once the driver depresses the clutch, commander ends up moving the differential, which is this, watch your ears, terrible noise on the top there. One of those gearsmen at the back, and there's little gear levers in these square sections on the rear. What he does is he lifts up those gear levers, and in essence what he's doing is he's disengaging this engine from turning the track on one side or the other.
Of course. Okay.
So if you stop the track on one side, the other track turns, you keep moving around the corner. So that is not an easy thing to do at the best of times, let alone under the stress of combat, noise, smoke, rough ground. As you can see, this is pre-health and safety. Everything's designed to smack you on the head or, cause you real problems in this sort of space there. But that's the idea about getting a well-trained crew, being able to do something like that
under those conditions.
Under those conditions, don't stall the engine, because if you stall the engine, you're then the sitting duck as a target.
Now, the conditions must have been just atrocious. I mean, the sound, the smell, the fumes. Can you tell them what it was like actually being there?
I mean, there's some brilliant first-hand accounts of guys who are going into actions in the tanks. They all talk about the noise. This engine, once it's run for about half an hour, the exhaust going through the top here, these glow red hot. So this can be a tremendously hot space after next to no time. The manifolds on the engine, quite often when they heat up, they separate from the engine, and that means we're pumping carbon monoxide into this space. Driver and commander up the front, they're getting a little bit more fresh air coming in, but some of the other crew members, there's a big report done in 1918 where they look at crew conditions and some of the casualties, and the point they say there is often they're finding crew members with carbon monoxide poisoning. What happens is you don't know you're getting it. You get drowsier yourself.
You just fall asleep and don't wake up.
Well, or the commander yells you an order, and they were finding guys who would repeat the order back to them but not actually execute it. And it's only when you get outside and you get some fresh air coming in, you start vomiting, start throwing up, and that's an indicator you're getting carbon monoxide.
It's kind of cool being in here when it's not in action.
It doesn't feel too bad. What always surprised me, we open this one up and we get 8 people in, and we do a little talk in it.
Oh, it must be claustrophobic though.
And that's what I was saying, and it's quite surprising how quickly, just 8 people without, the engine's not running, we're not doing any activity, but how hot it gets quite quick.
Yeah.
You also notice how many people, suddenly you'll find someone saying, I don't really like this, do you mind if I get out? You know, because again, that sense of, I'm not sure I can get out in a hurry, so the claustrophobia comes across. But the sensation of actually, again, you know, it's static, we're not being thrown around the place, but you still can't help, however careful you are, suddenly someone's going, oh, whack my head on it, and it's not even moving. You know, and that's all before the Germans start firing at you.
That's a big one when the Germans start firing at you. Now, other than the protection stuff, the external protection and things, well, you're holding something here, which you're going to show us. What kind of protection did the guys have in case bullets or something did get in, or gas or whatever?
So when you wear your clothing, what they tended to wear was overalls or a tunic. They found in the summer it was so ridiculously hot in here. There's accounts of the guys, they're wearing their shorts. There's one battle where some of the guys at the end of the battle, they're climbing out the back of the tank in their underpants. It's been so hot inside, just that. There's the issue as well of not just burning yourself, touching hot things, bashing your head. The very first Mark I tanks, they issue a leather crew helmet like this one here. It looks a bit like a sort of modern cycling helmet.
Yeah.
It's just really like a bit of a crash helmet to take a little bit of the impact.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
The problem was the crews, when they climbed out from the front or the side, that doesn't look dissimilar to a Picalba without the...
Oh boy.
They were being shot at by their own guys who didn't recognise a helmet. So these don't last very long. They're not very popular. Guys would sometimes wear a soft clap.
Yeah.
You don't wear your peak forward because, again, when you go up to a vision port, you knock it off the back of your head.
Of course.
So they sometimes turn them round. Sometimes a soft cap comforter made out of wool. Again, that will take some of the blows, but the honest truth is most of these guys are going to hit themselves all over the place. The other big problem they've got, of course, is when the Germans are firing at the vehicle, the impact of a bullet, the lead core, quite often on the impact on the steel, would melt. And that means you end up with things called bullet splash. So you've got that flying around the place. Now, if you look around the tank, there's actually, where the joins are, where they're riveted, vision ports, etc., there's quite a number of holes in this vehicle. And that bullet splash would find its way in, gets in your eye, it blinds you. So a little later, they issue the crews with these